Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you for being with me tonight. We have a very interesting case, so I won't keep you waiting for very long. During the weekend of November 16th and 17th, 2018, a Christian missionary by the name of John Allen Chau traveled to North Sentinel Island, located in the Bay of Bengal, India. He believed by doing this, he would be able to save the souls of hundreds of indigenous people known as the Sentinelese. His unwavering belief in Christianity and everlasting desire for adventure was ultimately his downfall. Despite the overwhelming evidence put forth by other people's previous travels to the island, John went anyways. He was prepared to be a hero, at least a hero in his eyes. Without giving away too much information yet, John would breathe his last breath on North Sentinel Island. This story is an incredibly interesting one, and we're going to go deep into John's life and the history of the people and what happened on that fateful weekend. Thanks, and enjoy the episode. John Chau was born in Alabama on December 18, 1991. His father is a Chinese man named Patrick Chau, who is a psychiatrist. Patrick was born in Guangzhou, China in 1952 and was an inspiring artist. However, during Mao's Cultural Revolution, Patrick was forced to work long, hard hours on a communal farm for 6 years. Patrick's father was able to get him to Hong Kong in 1974, and 2 years later, he moved to America, specifically in Los Angeles. He studied chemistry at the University of Southern California before winning a scholarship to medical school at Oral Roberts University, which is an evangelical college in Tulsa, Oklahoma. David's mother was Linda Adams, who is an American attorney. At the time that David's parents met, Linda was also at Oral Roberts University. She was actually a professor, though, and she met her future husband, Patrick, at a Christmas party. They married in 1985 and gave birth to their first son the next year, David's older brother, Brian. Patrick graduated medical school in 1988, and David's older sister, Marilyn, was born the next year. 2 years after Marilyn was born, Linda gave birth to David. So yeah, David's parents were an attorney and a physician. So it seems like maybe, he was probably going to have a pretty good life growing up, at least a well-off one. And this would be true. And while David and his siblings were raised in a Christian home, his parents didn't always share as devout of beliefs as one another. But Christianity had given his father schooling, career, and a well-off life. So, he was fine living the way that they did. David's father was a man of faith and science, and often debated in both of these things. Interestingly, David's brother and sister both followed in their father's footsteps. They both studied pre-med at ORU and eventually went to Loma Linda University to study medicine. They both would also become physicians. And David didn't follow in these exact same footsteps, but in a lot of ways he was like his father. He enjoyed the art that his father would create as a hobby and seemed to be a lot like his father was when he was younger. Two of John's biggest interests were the great outdoors and Christianity. He loved hiking and worshiping the Lord at the same time. He really did love hiking, camping, and exploring, and overall just having an adventure outdoors. And once he wrote, "Why do I hike? To see but a brief glimpse of the glory of the Creator." His whole life would become more and more wrapped around this as he got older. His father remembers once, while on vacation in Hawaii, John became obsessed with the idea of living on an island, a deserted island, how it would be fun to hunt for food and live off the land. It seems like John had an almost childlike idea for that sort of thing, like he didn't understand what it would be like to actually do this. Of course, as we all know, these ideas would never go away, and in the end would have devastating results on John's life. When he was a junior in high school in 2008, John went on a mission trip to help build orphanages in Mexico. This was a school trip, and it had a remarkable effect on John's life and future. He loved the experience he had, and he began to daydream what life would be like if that's all he did. He would also often wonder what the most extreme type of missionary trip would be. After this missionary trip with his school, John became extremely interested in finding out information about the most remote tribes on Earth. He seemingly became obsessed with reading about tribes like the Nicobars and the Adamants, who had completely cut themselves off from society for thousands of years. And this is exactly what he had been thinking and dreaming of finding. And honestly, I find myself pretty obsessed with this kind of thing as well. It's one of the reasons that this case is so interesting to me. Not only does it involve a tribe like this, but what John did and how he died is something like right out of a fictional true crime book, even though it really wasn't a true crime necessarily. John was obsessed with the idea of adventure that these tribes promised. And I said earlier that it was almost a childlike obsession into adulthood. Unfortunately, John didn't have the hindsight to see that, and tribes like this wanted to be left alone. Through his teens, John was reading book after book about different missionaries and the adventures that they would go on. John became particularly enthused by a guy named Jim Elliot. Jim Elliot was an American missionary who, with 4 other Americans, were killed by the Huaorani in Ecuador all the way back in 1956. Jim Elliot was actually from the same area as John, and John had really looked up to what Jim Elliot did. Just like Jim had set his eyes on the Huaorani tribe in Ecuador, John had his eyes set on the Sentinelese of North Sentinel Island. And to fully understand this case, I think we need to go over who the Sentinelese people were and understand the history of their interactions with outsiders. Like I said before, the Sentinelese are a tribe of indigenous people that inhabit North Sentinel Island in the Bay of Bengal, India. They are one of 6 Aboriginal people who live on the Greater Andaman and Nicobar Islands. The other 5 tribes are a bit more welcoming to outsiders than the Sentinelese are, and as Sentinelese have been known to be hostile to anyone who approaches, to the point of killing some who have made their way on shore. Because of this, in 1956, the government of India prohibited travel to North Sentinel Island within 3 nautical miles of the island. While no one knows exactly what the population of the isle stands at, it's said to be somewhere between 50 and 500, but more likely around 100. People have made contact with the Sentinelese multiple times in the recent decades, and it would end in aggression almost every time. In 1981, some of the Sentinelese attempted to surround and take control of a beach freighter on the island, and the crew had to be airlifted out. In 2004, a bowman of the tribe tried to shoot down a helicopter that was with the Coast Guard. In 2006, the Sentinelese killed a pair of crab fishermen who accidentally drifted onto shore. However, they were not always aggressive. In 1967, an anthropologist named T.N. Pandit led a group of 20 people to explore the island and try to befriend the people living on it. This venture onto the island was supported by India, and the group included multiple armed forces and naval men. The reason for this, or at least the reason that they gave, was to try and understand the people and the island better, and to at least gain some sort of control of the island and protect the people. The government of India believed that if they left the tribe completely alone, that the people in the island would become rampant with outlaws and other mercenaries who would destroy the island and the natural resources on it. T.N. Pandit's group witnessed a group of Sentinelese people standing on the beach of the island, and as Pandit's team came closer, the Sentinelese ran hiding into the forest. The team walked about 1 kilometer into the forest when they came upon 18 huts that were made of grass and leaves. They weren't able to make contact, so they left gifts at the huts and left the island. And starting in 1981, Pandit started making regular official expeditions to the island in hope of establishing a friendly narrative between the 2 groups. Some of these expeditions were in fact friendly, while others ended in aggressive attacks. A very peaceful encounter with the tribe occurred in 1991 when an Indian anthropological team visited the island. This was recorded on video as well. On this visit, for whatever reason, the Sentinelese people approached the team without weapons in hand for the first time. As the team gestured the tribe forward, they retreated into the forest. The team left, but came back the next day to a similar welcoming, except one of the bowmen with the tribe had his bow and arrow out. Eventually, he put his weapon down, and the team gave the tribe gifts. There were more instances of contact with the tribe over the years, but I won't get into all of them because it will take us down a deep rabbit hole that will last for 2 hours. But I'd highly recommend looking more into the history of the tribe, some things that might not have, everything to do with this case. The peaceful expeditions to the island I just talked about are the ones that gave John hope. However, I think it's pretty clear that to try and go to this island was a horrible risk to take. And it was also very illegal. By the time that John was 17 years old, he knew what he was meant to do. He was telling people that going to North Sentinel Island was his calling. And think about it like this. John's entire life was consumed by outdoor ventures and worshiping Jesus Christ. He had spent years obsessing over tribes just like the Sentinelese. The idea that they had never heard of Jesus? This was his ultimate missionary trip. What happened with Jim Elliot's encounter with the Huaorani tribe in Ecuador and all of the aggressive encounters with the Sentinelese people in the past didn't seem to cause any kind of concern with John. In fact, John looked at this as being heroic, and he looked at Jim Elliot as a hero who was trying to save an entire tribe from eternal damnation. John's father was deeply disturbed by his son's plans to bring Christianity to the North Sentinel Island. However, after John graduated high school, he went to ORU to study physical education and health, and was contemplating a career in medicine, or at least that's what he was telling his parents. His father believed him and started to have hope that John's plans were just that of fantasy. However, during all this, John's desire to spend all of his free time outdoors never diminished. He went on a mission trip with his school to Cape Town twice in 2017 and 2013. He graduated from ORU in 2014, and now with so much more free time, he dedicated his life to the outdoors. He made his first trip to the Andaman Islands, which, as I discussed before, is home to the many Andamanese tribes, including the Sentinelese. This trip showed that he was getting closer and closer to fulfilling his dream of visiting the Sentinelese. After this, he led expeditions around Mount Adams in Washington, and in 2016, for 6 months, he worked as a park guide in Northern California. He lived in a small cabin that was owned by the National Park Service. I assume he only stayed there for a short period of time because he wanted to go explore more of the world. He went to South Africa and India and all throughout California, backpacking alone. All of this was done while building a small following on Instagram. To his Instagram followers, he was living a dream, traveling all over the world, taking selfies that showed all the good times he was having on these trips, but never the bad. On his first trip to the Andaman Islands in 2015, people looking through the lenses of Instagram saw one gigantic adventure. They saw him hiking, relaxing on beaches, and scuba diving, but he had yet to reveal to the world his true intentions of being on that island, and what would come 3 years later. In 2016, a year after his first trip to the islands, he would make a second trip. In his father's mind, the idea that this could just be a fantasy seemed to end when his son made that second trip. His father decided to confront him on this, something that John's brother Brian thought would do no good. John's father told him, in so many words, that while the ideas that were in his head about saving the people of North Sentinel Island might come from a good place, he was unable to see what everyone else could, that it was an obsession that would lead down a dangerous path. Here is a quote from his father, quote, "In my observation, he was selectively collecting whatever preacher's doctrines were in favor of his self-directed, self-governed, and self-appointed plan," end quote. It seems like John was picking and choosing everything he wanted to believe in, as long as it lined up with his plans. His father believed that John was deceiving himself and was delusional. He believed his son was a victim of fantasies and extremism. However, nothing that anyone said could stop John. His mind was set. In 2017, John attended a boot camp-style missionary training in Kansas City, Missouri. This was done through All Nations, which was a missionary group whose intention was to focus on converting remote tribes like the Sentinelese. One of the exercises conducted at the boot camp was setting up a fake tribe with huts and fake spears. So there would be a group of people who would pretend to be the Aboriginal people and another group being the missionaries. And I can only imagine what that scene looked like. While there, he attempted to immunize himself against 13 different infectious diseases. Before this, he had taken a 9-week course at the Canadian Institute of Linguistics, which was focused on learning unknown languages. On John's ORU trip to Cape Town in 2012, he met Casey Prince. Casey, his wife, and their 2 kids lived in Ocean View, a township in Cape Town off of the Atlantic Ocean. John had befriended the family and visited them multiple times over the years. Before his final trip to the Andaman Islands, John spent a few weeks living with Casey and his family. Casey believed John's quest to the islands was extreme. Casey says that John expressed the signs that he had seen throughout his life that led him to this plan. The fact that God gave him a love for the outdoors and such a passion for his faith, and the ability to actually make all of this happen. Where Casey and his family lived in Ocean View was very close to a regional hub for All Nations. So while John was in town, he visited All Nations multiple times in order to get advice from them. Casey and another friend of John's named John Ramsey believed that John was of sound mind and knew exactly what he was doing. Casey says that he watched John mentally, physically, and spiritually prepare for himself for what he was about to do. On November 14th, late at night, John was able to convince some Christian fishermen to help him get to North Sentinel Island. Again, this was highly illegal, and these waters were guarded by Coast Guard vessels. The next morning, John was to make his first approach to the island. The fishermen would only go to a certain distance to the island, so John stripped down to his underwear and paddled a kayak out to the island. He thought if he were only in his underwear, the Sentinelese might feel more comforting. I'm going to read some of his journal entries of what occurred through his attempts at making contact. And I believe this is the best way to tell the rest of the story because he keeps very detailed journals from all the times he tried to make the attempts up until pretty much the end. November 15th, 2018. Around 08:30, I tried initiating contact. I went back to the kayak and built it up, then around to the boat and got 2 large fish, 1 barracuda, 1 half GT tuna. I put them on the kayak and began waving to the house we had seen. I was about 400 yards out. I heard women looing and chattering. Then I spotted 2 dugout canoes with outriggers. I rowed past one and saw movement on the shore. 2 armed sentinelese came rushing out yelling at me. They had 2 arrows each, unstrung, until they got closer. I hollered, "My name is John. I love you and Jesus loves you. Jesus Christ gave me the authority to come to you. Here is some fish." I regret I began to panic slightly as I saw them string arrows in their bows. I picked up the GT tuna and threw it toward them. They kept coming. I slid the barracuda off. It started to sink, but my thoughts were directed toward the fact I was almost in arrow range. I backpaddled. When they got the fish, I turned and paddled like I never have in my life, back to the boat. I felt some fear, but mostly was disappointed they didn't accept me right away. I can now say that I've been nearly shot by the Sentinelese, and I've walked and cached gear on their island. Now I'm resting in the boat, and will try again later, leaving gifts on the shore and in rocks. Lord, protect me and guide me. Later that day, he would make another attempt. November 15th, 2018. Well, I've been shot by the Sentinelese. After that initial contact, some of the guys went spearfishing and caught what they call a catala, a grouper or a sea bass with big lips. They caught 2, and each weighed about 30 pounds. After first going poop in the water, I built the kayak and we put the 2 fish on top and inside my small pelican. It contained pencils, my contact response kit for arrow wounds, abdominal pads, chest seal, dental forceps for arrow removal, picture cards, multivitamins, multi-tools, and unfortunately, my passports. I had my waterproof Bible and some gifts: scissors, tweezers, safety pins, fishing line, hooks, cordage, rubber tubing, and my new Speedo towel. I set off towards the north shore. As I got closer, I heard whoops and shouts from the hut. I made sure to stay out of arrow range, and as they yelled at me, I tried to parrot their words back to them. They burst out laughing. Probably were saying bad words or insulting me. Then 2 dropped their bows and took a dugout near me. I kept a safe distance and dropped the fish and the gifts. At first, they pulled their dugout past the gifts and were coming at me. Then they turned and grabbed the gifts. I paddled after them and exchanged more yells. Here's where this nice meet and greet went south. A child and a young woman came behind the 2 gift receivers with bows drawn. I kept waving my hands to say, "No bows," but they didn't get the memo, I guess. By this time, the waves had picked up and the kayak was getting near some shallow coral. The islanders saw that and blocked my exit. Then the little kid with the bow and arrow came down the middle. I figured that was it, so I preached a bit to them, starting in Genesis, and disembarked my kayak to show them that I too have 2 legs. I was inches from an unarmed guy, welt-built with a round face, yellowish pigment in the circles on his cheeks, about 5'5", and gave him a bunch of the scissors and gifts. Then they took the kayak. Then the little kid shot me with an arrow, directly into my Bible, which I was holding in front of my chest. I grabbed the arrow shaft as it broke on my Bible. The head was metal, thin, but very sharp. They left me alone as I half waded, half swam through the broken coral to the deep, where I knew their dugouts couldn't reach, then swam almost a mile back to the boat. Although I now have no kayak, nor my small pelican and its contents, I'm just grateful that I still have the written word of God. Lord, is this island Satan's last stronghold where none have had a chance to hear your name? He decided that his next attempt would be the following morning, and that he would try to make it without the fishing boat nearby. He thought maybe that if they weren't nearby, it might make the Sentinelese more comforted. Maybe he thought that being alone would help. Also, he thought that if things went wrong one more time, that the fishermen wouldn't have to see what would happen to him. This next journal entry really shows how scared John actually was, and it is his last journal entry. November 15th, 2018. The plan now is to rest and sleep on the boat, and in the morning to drop me off by the cache, and then I walk along the beach toward the same hut I've been giving gifts to. It's weird. Actually, no, it's natural. I'm scared. There I said it, also frustrated and uncertain. Is it worth me going on foot to meet them? Lord, let your will be done. If you want me to actually get shot or even killed with an arrow, then so be it. To you, God, I give all the glory of whatever happens. I don't want to die. Would it be wiser to leave and let someone else continue? No, I don't think so. I'm stuck here anyway without a passport. It almost seems like certain death to stay here. Yet there is evidential change in the two encounters in a single day. Watching the sunset, and it's beautiful. Crying a bit. Wondering if it will be the last sunset I see before being in the place where the sun never sets. Tearing up a little. God, I don't want to die. Who will take my place if I do? Oh God, I miss my parents, my mom, and my dad, and Brian and Marilyn and Bobby, even though he was just here, and Christian, and someone I can talk to and be understood. None of the guys on the boat know much English to ask their opinions and tell stuff to like this. I've never felt this much grief or sorrow before. Why? Why did a little kid have to shoot me? His high-pitched voice still lingers in my head. Now that I think about it, after I got shot by that arrow, I gave it back. Man, I should have snapped it. Father, forgive him and any of the people on this island who try to kill me, and especially forgive them if they succeed. What made them become this defensive and hostile? Why does this beautiful place have so much death? Last night, I had what I'd call a vision, as I've never had one before. My eyes were shut, but I wasn't asleep. I saw a purple hue over an island-like city as a meteorite or star fell to it, and it was a frightening city with jagged spires, and I felt disturbed. Then a different, whitish light filled it, and all the frightening bits melted away. Lord, strengthen me. Whoever comes after me to take my place, whether it's after tomorrow or another time, please give them a double anointing and bless them mightily. Like I said before, this is the last diary entry that John would make, or journal entry. Remember, at this point, he had every chance to turn back and go home. He lost his passport, so either way, he could have made something happen. And, you could tell that part of him wanted to. He knew the chances he would survive going back to that island one more time were slim, but he took the risk anyways. For in his eyes, it was his life's purpose. The morning of November 16th was the last time that John was seen alive. He asked the fishermen to drop him off alone. Later, when the fishermen came back, they saw Sentinelese tribesmen dragging John's body across the beach and burying it. So again, listening, for me reading, for you listening to that last journal entry is, insane. Listening to it is so incredible. That he doesn't want to go through with this. He is so dedicated with his cause. He's not thinking about anything else. And if you go back and read or listen to that part that he says, what made them become this defensive and hostile? Why does this beautiful place have so much death? He can't seem to wrap his head around what these people are and what they're doing and why they're living like this. All he can see is, I don't even know what he sees. His entire life is viewed through the lenses of Christianity and saving people. And so he views these people as people that need to be saved, not as people that are just trying to live their own type of existence, which is fine for them, fine for anyone, if that's what they want to do. He's not thinking about this. And I'm not going to say he deserved it. I don't think he deserved it necessarily. Someone can have that opinion if you want, but he definitely had it coming. And it's sad that he had to have this kind of mindset. But obviously I don't blame the Sentinelese people. They were doing what they do best, and that's protecting their home. But that's pretty much it. I want to give a great thanks to Alex Perry of OutsideOnline.com. He's one of the only people I have found that was able to talk intimately with John's family and get very detailed accounts of what happened. Everything I have written here, and spoken, rather, I wrote myself. But the details in this episode wouldn't have been possible without his work first. So if you want to read more, the link for that is in the description below. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.
Unholy and must be destroyed.